Here's an expanded version of your text in about 600 words, written smoothly and narratively without a heading. The tension in the maternity hospital had been palpable ever since the mother-in-law arrived. What should have been a moment of joy, the birth of a child, had instead turned into a battlefield of emotions, accusations, and unspoken grievances. The daughter-in-law, exhausted from labor and overwhelmed by the whirlwind of new responsibilities, had hoped for at least a few hours of peace, some quiet moments to bond with her newborn. But the mother-in-law had other plans. She had come with a single-minded determination to assert her authority, to control the situation, and in doing so, she created an atmosphere thick with anxiety. Voices were raised, words cut sharper than any surgical instrument, and soon it became clear that the tension could not be resolved through polite conversation. The mother-in-law began insisting that the daughter-in-law leave the hospital immediately, as if the new life brought into the world were overshadowed by old grievances and family hierarchies. The daughter-in-law, however, was not entirely defenseless. Though she was still weak and vulnerable from childbirth, her resolve had been quietly building for weeks. She had endured subtle criticisms, passive-aggressive remarks, and the constant scrutiny of someone who seemed determined to control not only her life but the smallest details of her domestic space. Now, in the sterile corridors of the hospital, she realized that this confrontation could no longer be ignored or minimized. Each step she took toward compliance felt like a surrender of her dignity, and she could feel the weight of every judgmental gaze pressing down on her. It was a moment that demanded attention, a pivotal juncture in the delicate balance of family dynamics. Just as the mother-in-law's voice reached a crescendo, echoing off the hospital walls, a sudden interruption changed the entire atmosphere. A visitor arrived unexpectedly, someone whose presence carried authority, calm, and an unspoken expectation that no nonsense would be tolerated. The mother-in-law froze, her anger momentarily silenced, replaced by shock and disbelief. For a brief moment, she had no words, no strategy, no ready retort. She was rendered speechless by this sudden twist of fate, a scenario in which her attempts to dominate the situation had been unexpectedly disrupted. The daughter-in-law, meanwhile, felt a surge of relief, knowing that the scales had shifted in her favor, if only slightly, and that the emotional storm that had threatened to engulf her was beginning to subside. The entire scene felt almost cinematic in its intensity. There was the exhaustion and vulnerability of the new mother, the rigidity and authority of the overbearing mother-in-law, and the dramatic arrival of the unexpected guest whose timing could not have been more perfect. Words like abandoned seemed to hang in the air, resonating with the emotional reality of both women. The daughter-in-law may have felt abandoned by familial support, left to navigate a world of responsibilities almost entirely alone. Yet the sudden intervention reminded everyone present that life is unpredictable, and that sometimes outside forces can bring clarity, fairness, or at least a pause in conflict. Amidst this personal drama, the larger world seemed almost absurdly theatrical, as if real life had merged seamlessly with the sensational headlines one might read in a tabloid. The juxtaposition of intense personal conflict with public commentary and sensational news created an odd duality, private pain and public spectacle intertwined, each amplifying the other. From the chaos of a family dispute in a hospital corridor to the broader discussions of celebrity confrontations on television shows, the scene underscored how human emotions, power struggles, and unexpected interventions shape our experiences in ways that are simultaneously dramatic, painful, and instructive. In the end, the mother-in-law's authority was momentarily halted, the daughter-in-law regained a fragment of control, and the newborn, blissfully unaware, remained the silent witness to a family drama of epic proportions. Life, with all its unpredictability, had once again reminded everyone present that even the most carefully orchestrated plans can be disrupted by the sudden arrival of someone unexpected, and that in moments of conflict, the balance of power can shift in an instant, leaving those who sought dominance stunned, speechless, and forced to reconsider their approach. If you want, I can also expand it even further into a more dramatic, emotionally intense 800 to 900 word version, weaving in more backstory and dialogue-like descriptions to make it read like a short narrative. Do you want me to do that? Here's a second expanded version of your text, written in about 600 words without a heading. The atmosphere in the maternity ward was charged with an unusual tension that made every step feel heavy. The daughter-in-law, still weak from childbirth, had expected relief and support after the long hours of labor, but instead she found herself facing the relentless pressure of her mother-in-law. What began as subtle hints and disapproving looks soon escalated into verbal demands and commands, the kind that stripped away any sense of calm or safety. The mother-in-law's insistence that the new mother leave the hospital immediately seemed both cruel and unnecessary, as if the birth of a child had no power to soften the rigid rules she had imposed. It was a collision of generations, a clash between the vulnerable, exhausted young woman and a figure who believed authority could override empathy. Each word from the mother-in-law carried the weight of judgment, and every gesture seemed designed to remind the daughter-in-law that she was subordinate, that she must obey without question. But the young mother, though drained physically, possessed a quiet strength that had been building in the weeks leading up to this moment. She had learned to endure criticism, to navigate the intricate web of family expectations, and now, in this high-stakes environment, she understood that standing her ground was essential not only for her own dignity but for her child. Each step toward confrontation was tentative yet resolute, a careful negotiation between fear and the need to assert herself. The hospital, usually a place of joy and healing, had become a stage for a deeply personal struggle. And then, as if orchestrated by fate, a sudden and unexpected visitor entered the scene. The timing was impeccable, the effect immediate. The mother-in-law, who had been so commanding moments earlier, suddenly found herself speechless. Her carefully constructed authority crumbled in an instant, replaced by shock and disbelief. It was as if the rules she had relied upon to dominate the situation had been suspended, leaving her unarmed in the presence of someone whose arrival carried a quiet power and an implicit demand for respect. The daughter-in-law, sensing the shift, felt a wave of relief and a newfound sense of hope. The tension that had threatened to overwhelm her was disrupted, and for the first time, the balance of power seemed to tilt slightly in her favor. The scene unfolded like a perfectly timed drama. The mother-in-law's fury, intense and unyielding just moments before, was suddenly muted, replaced by stunned silence. The daughter-in-law, previously on the defensive, could finally breathe, though her body still bore the marks of labor and her mind carried the echoes of confrontation. The unexpected visitor, by simply being present, altered the trajectory of events. The word, abandoned, lingered in the air, reflecting the emotional reality of both women. One had felt abandoned by support and understanding, while the other struggled with the sudden collapse of her authority. Yet the interruption reminded everyone that life is unpredictable, that even in moments of conflict, outside forces can intervene and create unexpected resolutions. In this small corridor of the maternity ward, the intersection of personal emotion and public perception became palpable. The drama, intense and private, mirrored the sensational conflicts often portrayed in media headlines, where authority is challenged, tempers flare, and the unexpected shifts the course of events. Each person present became acutely aware of how quickly control can change hands, how fragile dominance can be, and how powerful a single, timely presence can prove. It was a vivid demonstration of the complexities of human relationships, the intricate power dynamics within families, and the unpredictable ways in which life can disrupt carefully laid plans. By the time the immediate confrontation ended, the mother-in-law's dominance had been temporarily suspended, the daughter-in-law had reclaimed a sense of control, and the newborn, innocent and oblivious, remained the silent witness to a drama that had encompassed generations, emotions, and power. In the end, the event served as a stark reminder that authority is never absolute, that conflict is often inevitable, and that sometimes, the sudden appearance of a single individual can shift the balance entirely, leaving those who sought control astonished, speechless, and forced to reconsider their actions. If you want, I can now create a third 600-word expansion that emphasizes the emotional and psychological perspectives of all characters even more, making it feel almost like a mini short story. Do you want me to do that? Here's a third expanded version of your text in about 600 words, focusing on the drama, emotions, and psychological tension, without a heading. The maternity hospital, usually a place of quiet anticipation and gentle excitement, had become the epicenter of an intense family drama. The daughter-in-law, weary and tender from childbirth, had hoped for nothing more than a few hours of peace to bond with her newborn. Instead, she was met by the overbearing presence of her mother-in-law, whose face carried a mix of disapproval, authority, and impatience. The air was thick with tension, each word exchanged charged with more than simple disagreement. It carried years of unresolved conflicts, expectations, and family hierarchies. The mother-in-law's insistence that the young mother leave the hospital immediately was not merely a suggestion but a demand, a stark reminder that her version of order and control would prevail unless challenged. The daughter-in-law felt the weight of every critical glance, every pointed remark, as if the walls themselves were judging her inadequacy. Yet, beneath her exhaustion, there was a simmering determination. This was not the first time she had faced criticism, nor would it be the last, but the stakes were higher now. Her child's first moments of life should not be overshadowed by old grudges and rigid authority. She understood that her voice, her presence, mattered, not just for herself, but for the small life she had brought into the world. With every insistence from her mother-in-law, she felt the need to assert her right to stay, to protect her own dignity, and to create a space where her newborn could feel safe. The confrontation reached its peak just as emotions threatened to boil over. Voices were raised, and the hospital's usually calm corridors echoed with tension. The mother-in-law, convinced of her superiority and authority, could not fathom being contradicted, yet the young mother's quiet strength began to emerge, subtle but unmistakable. The push and pull between dominance and resistance created a charged, almost cinematic atmosphere. It seemed that the situation would escalate beyond control, and any moment could tip the balance entirely. And then, unexpectedly, a visitor arrived. Their presence was sudden, unannounced, and entirely disruptive to the established dynamics. The mother-in-law froze, her words failing her for the first time that day. Shock and disbelief replaced her fury, leaving her unable to continue her verbal assault. In an instant, the energy in the room shifted. The daughter-in-law, sensing the reprieve, felt a wave of relief wash over her, a subtle but profound sense that she was no longer entirely alone in defending herself and her newborn. The visitor's silent authority had shifted the balance of power, and the mother-in-law, unprepared for this disruption, was rendered speechless. Abandoned, the word seemed to echo in the daughter-in-law's mind, a reflection of the complex emotions she had carried into this conflict. She had felt abandoned in the moments leading up to childbirth, left to navigate a world of expectations with limited support. And yet, in this moment, she was reminded that intervention can come from the most unexpected sources, reshaping a situation in ways no one could predict. The mother-in-law, on the other hand, faced the sudden collapse of her control, forced to reassess her assumptions and strategies. The entire scene illustrated the delicate interplay between human emotions, authority, and chance. In the span of a few minutes, the dynamics of dominance and vulnerability, expectation and reality, shifted dramatically. The newborn, oblivious to the intense human drama surrounding them, lay at the center of the storm, a quiet reminder of the innocence and continuity that life demands even amidst conflict. By the end, the mother-in-law's command over the situation had been temporarily suspended, the daughter-in-law had reclaimed her sense of dignity, and the unexpected visitor had subtly but irrevocably changed the course of events. Life, with its unpredictability, had demonstrated yet again that control is never absolute, that moments of crisis can be interrupted by the unforeseen, and that even in the most fraught circumstances, change is possible, leaving all involved stunned, reflective, and forever altered. If you want, I can also combine all three expanded versions into a single flowing 1,800-word narrative, weaving the events, emotions, and perspectives together for maximum dramatic effect. Do you want me to do that?